Good evening, everyone. It's 7 p.m., so I'm going to open the meeting, and will you all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Cheryl, will you take roll, please?
Present.
Here.
Here.
Present. Present.
Here.
And Jermaine is out on personal reasons, so could I get in?
Move to excuse.
All right.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? So I'm looking for approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the agenda.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? So I had a motion by Councilman Couch and a second by Councilwoman Dunlea. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the consent agenda. Do I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move the consent agenda. Second.
So I had a motion by Councilman DeYoung and seconded by Councilman Couch. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries. We do not have any special guests tonight, so let's move into staff reports. So, Chief Tucker.
So we had kind of a fun-filled weekend, for lack of a better term. We had, some of you may have heard about the motor vehicle that was driven out on the football field, doing some damage. We met with the school district today. They've had people in to take a look at it and going to give us an estimate. In all, there's got to be several $1,000s worth of damage, not just to the ball field, but to the gate going in, and one of the vehicles was damaged. So apparently in the middle of the night, somebody decided that would be fun to drive out on the football field. They rammed the gate and kind of little brodies out on the field. Fortunately, it doesn't look like they did any really significant damage that will stop the use of the field, but it could be some damage to the underlying structure of the field. And as many of you know, they did an extensive rebuild on that here a few years ago, and it's a pretty specialized field. So we're still following up on that. We now own a somewhat beat up and muddy S10 pickup that was used to do that damage, and we're trying to get somebody to come clean on doing it. We serve search warrants on the vehicle, and our detectives are looking into that. We had a bomb threat. It turned into a bomb threat out at United General Hospital on Monday. Employee came out of the pavilion building, and they heard some beeping coming from the trash can. They called security, and they got a pretty sharp security guard working out there. He went over and checked it out, looks in and sees a package inside the trash can with wires sticking out of it, and it's beeping, just like a James Bond movie. It looked exactly like what you would expect some shady-looking bomb was going to look like. And he evacuated the building, called us. We got up to take a look at it, had no idea what it was, and called the bomb squad. What it turned out to be is a security device for some store where they used to put those cable things through leather jackets So when you'd steal it, it would beep?
Yes.
Well, they wrapped the beeper up in packing material to silence it when they were running out the store. So we guessed that somebody stole something and then just wadded up the wiring after they cut it and stashed it in the trash can. And it could have been a jacket or tools or anything. Those things are fairly popular security devices. But we had in talking to United General Hospital folks, we had a really good drill out of it. And they got to pull out their incident command gear, and we kind of treated it as such until we got the all clear from the bomb squad who came up from Everett, the sheriff's office who came from Mount Vernon and flew the drone over the whole thing to kind of give us a good look over. It was a good learning experience for all of us, and we couldn't really do much different. We couldn't get Councilman Couch to come down and go up and shake the package or anything like that, which was our first option. We did have a couple of other issues that came up, and it's just kind of one of those things we're dealing with regularly, is the threats to the school. We've had two different kind of somewhat threats thrown out on social media, and we've kind of ran those to ground. One of them was we're waiting on search warrant returns on a social media account, and the other one was just stupid. It was stupid 8th, 9th graders doing stupid 8th, 9th grade boy things. That one ended up in a kid being expelled from school, and we're going to go through a threat assessment with the school district before he's allowed back in, and before he's kind of finally cleared. No credible threat, but you can't yell fire at a theater. You can't yell shoot up homecoming on social media and get away with it.
Wow.
So we're looking into those things right now. We're devoting quite a bit of resources to those, and the school district's kind of given us a workout this last week. And that's all I have.
Well, you've done some great training there.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, which is perfect. I also, tonight when I was at the Solutions to Addiction, one of the gals I sat next to, she actually works out at United General, and she was saying that they were calling cold black, and everybody was looking at their name tags, looking for what color the black stood for, and it wasn't there. So now they've added a new color. Now they know what it's for when they hear cold black.
And I apologize for not making it to that. My week got weird.
No worries. It was great. I'm sure Paula will probably speak to it. It was very good. Chief Klinger.
You know, it's you rearrange the council a little bit, Mayor. I don't know if you rearrange here, because it is tough to follow Chief Tucker when he has all this exciting stuff going on. But it's been an exciting couple weeks for us. We've been working on the EMS front. I know Aaron's got it on the agenda for a little bit later to bring up. The hiring process is ongoing. They're hopefully starting interviews Monday for all the medics, and that process will continue on through most of October. So hopefully we'll be bringing a bunch of people into here sometime at the end of October, first part of November, and introducing them. The Volunteer Association will be talking here shortly under items about the burn dance, so I'm going to skip that. We have started our training hub items. We have gotten our material in, so we are going to start doing the public CPR classes and so forth for the county. So that process is ongoing. And if anybody wants to watch pump tests, I invite everybody to come and go through the hose testing. We're doing pump testing next week also, so you're more than welcome to come up to Station 2. There'll be different vehicles from all over the county showing up and using our tank up there. So,
What was the date on that again? What was your date on that?
the pump testing, it's sometime the first week of October, and that's about as good as you get from the mechanic. So, you know, if you want, call me and I'll tell you when to come on up.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Mr. Coleman.
All right, so big news happening in the Planning Commission and Planning Department front is the Planning Commission completed their work on the planned residential development regulation updates, so I'll be bringing that to the City Council for your review at the next council meeting and then possible action on the meeting after that. Planning Commission worked on this for I think it was 17 meetings. So they put a
Wow.
lot of work into it. Don't worry, I'll give you a fairly decent rundown of what that what this project is at the next city council meeting. But just in a nutshell, it's an alternate method of doing subdivisions, residential subdivisions, that allows, in exchange for no change in density per se, that would be allowed in any piece of land, but you allow the developer to do some more clustering, and then the city gets more open space out of it, or at least that local community gets more open space and a higher level of aesthetic review. So that is what the Planned Residential Development project is about, also called PRD. So you probably will hear the acronym PRD being thrown about quite a bit over the next few weeks. And incidentally, I know that a lot of local developers have been waiting for this to happen so they can take advantage of the new rules, and that opens up a lot of acreage for a lot more units. And so we're expecting to see, if these rules change, some large subdivision applications to come in. Speaking of applications, we've had a very busy couple of months, a huge increase in land use permits, which are different than building permits. You know, building permits are fairly specific just to a building and how that gets developed. The land use permits are subdivisions, conditional use permits, excavation and grading permits that have environmental review, such as the SEPA process and notification process. Anything that's going to have a notice of application attached to it. So we've seen a huge wave. Frankly, I'm far behind on a lot of those. Pushing the limits of what we're allowed time-wise. So the local development community has been pretty patient with me, and hopefully, you haven't been hearing from them yet. But it's just a matter of not enough staff power to handle all of the applications, and then of course all of the rest of the work that the planning department does. So I apologize for being behind. I'm doing my best to catch up, and we'll see how that goes.
You do a great job. You work hard. Thank you. Mr. Freiberger.
Yes, just a couple of things. Fruitdale project's moving ahead. They poured the center section of the roundabout up there, the many that's going in at Northern States, finished it today. And they're looking to pave the second week of October and be done the third week, as long as the weather continues with the good pattern we've had the last couple of weeks. One thing of concern that's come up in the last few days, the contractor started work on the north part from the Williams pipeline up to the city limits. We'd had some concerns with the slopes of stability up there, and we had designed in to do some removal and some reinforcement of the paving section in that area. As we were preparing to do that, we were finding that the base in the roadway was actually pretty good, where we were going to take it out and replace it, so we decided not to do that. But as we were looking over the bank, because we had seen some pavement distress up in that area, that was the reason we were planning to do that work. We looked farther, and it turns out the little ravine that's next to that, that runs up roughly to the city limits, there is some pretty significant bank erosion in there. It's about a 30-foot deep ravine, and it basically picks up quite an area to the north and west of the city limits there, that runs in an old culvert. There's a 36-inch culvert under the old railroad grade that used to go into Northern States. That culvert's apparently partially collapsed, and it's causing some water swirling and some bank erosion. Way beyond what we can do with this project to address it. We do have a backup plan, though, and we're going to keep an eye on it in future years. If it does start affecting the road, we can move the road over to the north, but that'll be another project. But just wanted you to be aware of that, something that we're looking into. It was just something that was very difficult to determine. It was a jungle up there, and as we had it cleared as a part of our work, we took some large trees down, that we thought might be part of the reason for the bank instability, but actually it's a little deeper than that, and a very difficult problem to solve at this stage in the game. The contractor hasn't started other than some prep work on the State Street overlay yet. They encountered some concrete underneath the asphalt where they were getting ready to excavate for the water main. That's delayed them a couple of days, but we expect them to be fully engaged in that work in the next few days, and they're looking to pave somewhere towards the end of October on that project. Also getting ready to start the West Nelson, West Bennett Beatty sewer project and finish that up by the end of the year as well. I'll be preparing an advertisement for bids for the wastewater treatment plant Phase 1 improvements I've been talking to you about. We've got the plans and specs from the consultant. We need to add our front-end documents and put that out to bid, hopefully in the next 2 weeks, and that'll happen this winter as well. Beyond that, I've been asked to be a presenter tomorrow morning in Anacortes at the Washington Transportation Professionals Forum. They've heard that we've built a few roundabouts here in Sedro-Woolley over the past few years, and in fact, the state engineer that handles that, I worked with him on the first roundabout I built in Colville in 2000. And that was number 32 in the state at the time. There's probably 400 or 500 of them now. So I've been around them for a while. Their particular question for me was how does the roundabouts that we've built affect the traffic patterns in the city? And we've talked about that at this meeting quite a bit. And so I went and did a bit of an analysis. I've been watching that all along anyway. We have traffic counts done in cooperation with the county every year, and I just got those for 2018. They're usually done in January, February. And we knew after we opened the Cook Highway 20 roundabout and the Cook Ferry roundabout in 2015 that the traffic pattern changed by about 3,000 vehicles a day.
Wow.
Between Highway 20 and Cook Road, and that's continued. We're also seeing a traffic growth, of course, on that whole corridor. Interestingly enough, there's about 17,000 vehicles a day that come into Sedro-Woolley on Highway 20. There were in 2013, there were in 2015, and there still is in 2016 about that same amount of vehicles coming in. Over that same period of time, we went from 13,000 vehicles on Cook Road entering the city to at the junction of Highway 9, which is a little farther in on Highway 20, it went from 13,000 to 10,000. That's that 3,000 change, and that went from 10,500 on Cook to 13,000. So that was the shift we saw, and that's continued today. But the traffic volume has continued to grow. It's grown another 1,000 on Highway 20 at the junction at Highway 9, and then another 1,000 on Cook Road. So traffic is continuing to grow, coming in and out of the city. Now, also on Jameson, which we've had quite a few calls over the last several years about from the neighbors down there about increasing volume on Rhodes Road, which we pass on to the county, and they're keeping a close eye on that. They're actually monitoring that a couple of times a year. After that opened, we had predicted that it would go from about 500 vehicles a day to roughly 1,400, and that's held true. We counted right after opening, it went up from 500 to 700, and then within 6 months it was up to 1,300. The preliminary counts that I have right now are 1,900 on that. Now that's still not a lot of vehicles, but it looks like a lot if you're used to walking down the middle of Rhodes Road. And so that's the complaints we get, and as we said in our public meetings on that, both the county and the city are looking at downstream projects to upgrade roads. The main fix for that is to add a sidewalk that would connect the neighborhoods and allow people to have a place to walk along there. And so we're continuing to talk with the county about that. They do have a project of sorts in their comprehensive plan, and as that traffic grows, that'll become more of a priority for them to address. Jameson, the other side of the street, you've been hearing complaints about that as well. That was little bit of a head scratcher for me. Before the roundabout opened up in 2015, at the 3rd Street intersection, we had about 3,000 vehicles a day on Jameson. It jumped up to 3,900 after opening. Now, the most recent count, it's up to 4,900, another 1,000 vehicles. And so it is fairly busy down there, and that's being reflected in the pavement condition. As I mentioned to you, that's really deteriorated over the last couple of years, and we have a TIB application in on that. So I thought you might be interested in that. And if you would like me to, at some point, I can do a more detailed presentation on what I'm going to talk about tomorrow for council. So anyway, that's all I had.
I'm sorry, Mark. I can't remember if you said or not, will the work that you found, the additional work that's going to be needed, is that going to slow the opening of? No.
The road is stable. The gully there is about 30 foot deep, and it's about 40 foot from the fog line to that creek line. So it's almost a 1-to-1 if it fell in. So it's stable enough for the time being. We'll just have to keep watching it. As we looked at it today, David Lee had actually walked down in there about 2 years ago. Actually, probably 4 years ago, I think he told me. No, it was 6. It was 2013. Wow. The years are passing when that was closed. And he had noticed some distress up in there at the time. It was such a jungle down in there that he couldn't get up the creek, and so he was looking at it the side. And he didn't notice this sheer failure we saw today when we got down in there. But it doesn't look like it's really changed that much over the last few years from what it did. So we're thinking it's probably okay for the time being. And we do have that backup plan of just moving the road. It would involve moving about 300 or 400 feet of it, shifting a lane over basically into the bank. Just too late in the year for us to approach that now. If I'd have known this early on in the project, I would have designed it differently, but it's going to serve us fine for the time being, and we'll watch it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Berg?
Just a couple items from me tonight. The first, the auctions are now listed at publicsurplus.com for the equipment at the old Iron Skillet restaurant. So it's a fairly short fuse auction. So if you know somebody, none of you are eligible, of course, but if you know of somebody who'd like a meat slicer or a pie case or whatever's on the website there, log in soon. I think it's a 7-day auction, tied to have all that gone before we begin the asbestos remediation, the second week of October. So that's out there. I do have a late materials item on your dais, which is the cover letter from Habitat for Humanity. I think it would be useful to get some direction from council tonight, at least some sense. Also, Teresa Pugh's in the audience tonight from Habitat. This is with regard to the property the city owns on Reed Street. Habitat has made an offer to purchase it, and as strange as it feels to be talking about it this way, the executive session exemption for the sale of real estate only applies in the case we're talking about it publicly might result in a lower price. And I just can't really find a way where that fits tonight, so I'm just giving it to you here. So the question for the council is, are you interested in selling? And if so, then the follow-up question becomes one of assessing valuation. So this is their offer. You may recall that I was working on some appraisal for this property in the past. I ran up against multiple $1,000 appraisal offers, and I just couldn't get excited about that and kind of moved on to something else. So I don't have an appraisal for you. The city's certainly free to surplus it and sell it to Habitat for Humanity, but we are required to at least understand what it's worth and sell it for that price. So there's a couple steps involved. Teresa put together a cover letter which is on your dais, and I don't know if Mayor, if you'd be amenable, or if she'd be interested, but she's here and may very well be happy to speak for a couple minutes.
Absolutely. Teresa, do you want to come forward and speak on this?
Explain everything that may be people might want to know. I'm Teresa Pugh, the Executive Director of Skagit Habitat for Humanity, and thank you for asking me to come up. Basically, in our letter, we have been talking with the city about this particular property and researching it, and we were told that Becky Eldey, a real estate agent, appraised it. It wasn't us that appraised it and came up with the price. So Becky Eldey, not related to Habitat at all, she appraised the price. And so our purchase and sale agreement is agreeing with the price that she presented to us and asking for a 60-day feasibility in the study. And the reason for that is because the plat was originally platted for 15 lots back in 2008, and it was approved by the city for a developer. And there is some wetlands potentially still, even though the city cleared some of the easement on the side and did some drainage ditch work. So we would need some feasibility time to go in and with some civil engineers, and a lot of with ecology and some of the rules and regulations these days, they've changed since the stormwater issues, they've changed since 2008. So we would just need a little bit of time to go in and make sure that the property is works for us and would be affordable to develop out. Certainly willing to talk with the city about it. You know, we've talked about certain things. They presented it potentially as a park, and so I know that you're looking at other areas maybe to have a park, because that is rather a large piece. Would work wonderful for us. It would allow us, my letter states, we're 4 houses we're going to be building starting in December with the high school and other community members. It would allow us to build on those 4 lots here in Sedro, and then take the time that it takes to develop the infrastructure and raise the funds to be able to get that prepared, so by the time we're done with the other 4, we can stay here in Sedro-Woolley. We can build out at least potentially 12 homes. It says it's slotted for 15, but reality is it's probably would be about 12 homes. And so it would allow us to stay in Sedro-Woolley and help with 12 more families, and then work with the school district and make it easier for them to continue their geometry and construction program. So I ask that you, if you have any questions or anything, you can contact myself and or our real estate agent, but I would ask that you give it some really good consideration. Looking through your Growth Management Act and looking through your 2016 comprehensive plan, there was several notes. I didn't put them in the letter because it would have been another 2 pages. But within your plan, it states what we can provide for the city and what we can provide for homeowners. It matches up with a lot of what you're looking to present in the plan as well. So I think it would be a wonderful partnership for many reasons. So, any questions?
I have a question. It says 6 homes located here. That doesn't include the 4.
No. Currently, we already have 6 homes that we've already built out in Sedro-Woolley. Those have been completed for some time, and so with the 4, that'll bring us up to 10 homes, affordable homes here in Sedro-Woolley. And then if we were able to purchase this property, depending on what we find out, the cost, and with environmental and stormwater, it would allow us to build up to potentially maybe another 12 homes here locally, which, as I wrote in here, we all know that rents, there's 0 vacancy rate in Skagit County as well as many other counties, so people that are looking to rent, it's extremely hard for them to even find a rental, let alone find an affordable rental, and our average 3 bedrooms in Skagit County are $1,200 or above for a rental. Our program currently, the highest mortgage payment to date, that includes their escrow, which is their property taxes, their insurance, their flood insurance, and the principal payment, is $950. So talk about affordability for families, and I can tell you story upon story how it changes the lives. Then it changes the children, it gets them financially stable, they're able to, we have a lot of them now, they volunteer in the community, they've been able to go back to school, and they are now a huge part of our community. But once you take somebody out of once you give them that financial stability and take them out of the realm where they're just every month they're living paycheck to paycheck and they're having to rely on our society for other social services that cost the taxpayer a lot of money, they come into our program, they're not using those services anymore, which means those funds are available for other people to use. But we find that they stabilize in many different ways, as well as their children stabilize in school because they're not moving from different place to different place. And they really, really do become, they're so appreciative, and they give back to the community in financially and volunteering, and they really appreciate it, but their children learn from that as well. And so it's not just one family, one home. It literally is all about the community. So we feel like we are making a difference in our community for years to come, and would love to be building here again.
All right. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
So this is for us to talk about. I don't know if this is something that you'd want to put on our work session, or how would you like to handle this?
I would like us to, I'm all in favor of affordable housing, but I'm also in favor of parks. And so I wanted us to come up with, I just want to make sure that we're going to get a park really soon in our ward, right?
So that's something maybe that we can talk then in the work session, is exactly what do we want to do. So maybe we want to go with the way it's laid out, maybe we don't. Maybe we do want to do something else with the land, but...
Aaron, question. Do we have to... I guess what would be the timeline for getting an appraisal for the city's purposes, so we could at least have that as part of the discussion?
Good.
Well, so we've had a couple brokers' opinion of values, and that's what Teresa was talking about with Becky Eldey. An actual appraisal from a certified appraiser. I don't think it would take us more than a couple of weeks, but the best price I got was up in the several $1,000s range, which just seemed too high to me. So I don't know why that was. I'd be happy to take another look at appraisers, and it should cost us, I would think, more like $700 or so to get somebody to do the work on comps and come up with their opinion of current value. But I tried 3 or 4, I can't remember, and got to the one who was ready to do it.
So, Aaron, do you think that has anything to do with the fact that it has the potential for the wetlands on it, or?
No, I don't think the wetlands were a super complicating factor. I'm not sure what the problem was, honestly.
And Becky's was more of a market analysis?
Yeah, she gave us I would call it a comparative market analysis.
Okay.
Yeah, so process-wise, I guess I would just offer, if the council wants to do this, to me the threshold question is kind of the preliminary. All right, we're interested in selling it, and we're willing to work with Habitat. Then there are steps that need to be taken. This property was purchased initially with stormwater utility funds, which I think, we'll double check, but that's my memory, which would trigger the necessity of a public hearing on surplusing it. So we would need to go through that process. Not insurmountable, just something to schedule. And then the only other process issue is just ensuring that we meet the constitutional mandate against gifting funds, and so that's that assessment of value, which we could, I think, achieve through a comparative market analysis, or maybe a couple of them, or a broker's opinion of value, or an appraisal. It's just that we've gotten a couple different CMAs. It depends on how they look at it, and it's tough when you haven't market tested it, because there are builders who would probably be interested in this site as well, and so we just don't know. So that's a piece of the puzzle, but I guess in my mind, not a whole lot of value in going through that process unless the council thinks it's interested in selling the property. Oh, and the other piece is we'll also have to retain, we've got some easements in that area for stormwater that we'd want to create and ensure would be there. Teresa's group would have to work around. Not only is there a ditch that runs east to west, which is one of the reasons we acquired the property, but there's also it's sort of like a cowboy ditch that runs north to south. I call it a cowboy ditch because it doesn't seem like it was super intentional. Maybe the neighbors just built it one day. But it does carry stormwater from neighbors to connect into that. So, as part of their process, I would anticipate they may have to put in, some pipe to keep that water flowing from neighbors into the city's system and build around that, and retain some capacity for somebody to maintain it. So there's no question a feasibility period would be important for them to understand how many units they could get for those reasons and the wetland reasons.
So what you're looking from us is direction as to whether or not we want to pursue this.
Yeah, and the work session's fine. There's no rush.
Right.
I mean, I didn't look, but I'm sure the offer has an expiration date. But I'm also quite confident that the offer would be something we could discuss after the expiration date too.
So, can you show us on your map up there exactly where this property is located?
We could probably get it on the wall too. I apologize because I actually had copied the location, and that's that weird yellow blob you see. Just north of Highway 20. You'll see what I was trying to copy on that page.
Oh, okay, the yellow.
Yeah, so that's the shape of the property.
So where is John Liner in relation to this?
John Liner is further north of the property. There aren't really blocks in that neighborhood. I don't know, the equivalent of 3 blocks maybe.
It's really, it's just south of
Hyatt.
Yeah.
the Teresa, that big giant. The
Hyatt goes through to your street, right?
So Hyatt, the properties on Hyatt back up to this property.
Yeah, I was just thinking like a landmark would be that big property on John Liner and Reed where we had all those issues and we just sold that. The one,
Right.
you know what I'm talking about. It's just south of there, if you guys remember where that is.
Say that again, what's your name?
John Liner and Reed, where that property, where we were having all those issues, I guess, what was it, a couple of years ago now? And they just auctioned or sold that off and auctioned the stuff. And it's just south of that. We've talked about that property for a long, long time. That's that big, giant one on Reed. The manufactured homes up there, mobile home park.
Right,
It's just
but this is south of there.
just south of that. It's right across from where I live. Right across
Would
the
you like
field.
to have that on the work session?
Yeah, let's put that on the work session,
Yes.
and we can carry on from there.
For next week. Okay, very good. So we'll have that, I'll probably just have it as an agenda item and no additional materials unless there's something somebody'd want. And the last item I'd mention is just to save the date for you. The mayor will be calling a special meeting for October the 10th, which is a council night, for a meeting at 5 o'clock. I know I mentioned it before, but we're getting closer, so time to mention it again. That will be a joint meeting between the city council and the library district board to see the 90% design of the new Central Skagit Sedro-Woolley Library. So we'll have a very similar format as last time, where the architect will give the presentation and take questions from council members and board members, and then break out into functional areas around the room to answer questions about specific elements of the project. Pretty excited about it. They're going to be able to provide some visualization of the building, 3D walkthrough kind of thing, so you get a sense of what the space looks like from inside the new library.
It's beautiful.
So that's it. But EMS still all the time, and we've got that on the agenda tonight. So we'll get to that shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Merriman.
Thank you, Mayor. And we're hoping with the new additions to the microphones tonight, you can hear me fine speaking here. Great.
Yay, Doug.
Okay. Finance, we have a number of things going on. First, budget. It's that time of year, and we're very deep in the budget process right now. What you can look forward to over the next couple of months is departments have turned in their requests to me. They're in the BIAS software system, and we're starting to go through those now just to make sure everything is where it needs to be. That's on the expenditure side of it. The revenues, after our discussions tonight, I'll be inputting those into the system. which leaves the third leg of that stool, the capital outlay requests. We'll be starting to take a look at those and seeing what projects we're planning to do for next year. So that'll take us through most of the month of October to go ahead and get those planned out, get things balanced up, so we can bring forward to you a preliminary budget that gives us a good snapshot of what we'll be looking at for next year. As you've heard as well from others, EMS has been a big part of our lives, and finance, we've been in that party as well. A couple different things we're doing is we're looking at setting up a fund or a department where to place that from an accounting perspective, and then looking at the costing of that function and the logistics of how we handle that with people. We all know we would be using paramedics in that, but we'll also need a billing person who would potentially be residing down in finance with our great team down there. So there's a lot of planning and things that we are encouraged to get done rather quickly, because before we know it, January 1 will be here and we'll be deep in the middle of this. Some other things that I'm looking at right now, if you hear on the news about interest rates, the Fed committee raised interest rates 0.25% here this week. That's the third time this year that they've raised rates again now. So what that triggers for me is to start looking at our investments. Right now we're invested in the state investment pool, and the state of Washington handles our investment funds. Typically, I've seen over the years that fund, even though it gives us really good liquidity, we can move money back and forth as we need it, it will lag behind the market, especially when interest rates are starting to move up. That's called a rising interest rate environment. We want to make sure that the state is staying competitive and following that. So I'll be watching them and seeing what they're doing. So we may have some ideas on investing that get us more market-based than just being with the state. So there's a couple different things like that that we'll be looking at, and as we get a chance and start looking at things, I'll bring that back to you in the future. That's what I have.
Great, thank you. Councilman Couch.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple quick things. I wanted to thank Mark and his staff for a quick response to a citizen complaint with the Jones Road development. I appreciated David Lee getting the ball rolling with getting them an answer, and also was contacted by some citizens. I had some concerns about trees around the senior center, and I spoke to Nathan about those, and just always appreciate the city staff being responsive. I thank the council for excusing me last week. I had a work-related event that I needed to be gone for, and the only thing I was going to report there is thanking our fire chief and Assistant Chief Wagner and the city staff that have been working so diligently on the EMS stuff. I made it to one of your early morning meetings, and as you all rushed off to other meetings, it's great to see the hard work that everybody's putting into this, and I think we've got some great things coming for the city on that. So thank you all for your hard work on that. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Councilman Owen?
Just a couple of things. I just follow up what Jared was talking about, the trees. We're all aware of it, and you are too, Aaron, that those pine trees, they do a lot of damage to the building, and they're nasty. They fill the gutters, and I agree with him. Those trees need to come out. I'm sure there's a few people that think they're awful pretty that don't want it, but I think the majority would like to see them come out of there and have grass or something there. So it is a problem. Another thing is, all you people on the council and the staff and people out in the audience, next Wednesday from 12 to 3, there's a lady going to bring a camel down to the senior center, and you have little kids, grandkids, and I'm sure they would enjoy that. So if you do, you're all welcome, and just come down and enjoy Clyde the camel. That's all I have.
Thank you.
I'm pretty sure the council authorized horse riding in town. I don't recall that extended to camel riding.
I was going to ask John if we have to get a permit to bring the camel in.
Speaking of trees, I was actually going to bring up, I've been noticing since dropping off my foster daughter at school, I think actually Dennis might have brought this up quite a few meetings ago before school even started, but those trees on McGargle, as you're crossing over from Jones across Highway 9, going to Evergreen, there's some shrubbery on the left side as you're coming, and you just cannot, there'll be kids coming down that hill, and there's a crosswalk right there, but you can't see them until, you have to nose right out onto Highway 9 to be able to see the sidewalk. And they just come right around the corner there.
Actually, it used to be much worse than that. That's on private property, and we have worked with the owner to get it trimmed back to where it is, but I'll take another look at it.
Yeah. Also, before our next meeting, we'll be having Festival of Family Farms here in the county, and I know we have quite a few participants here in Sedro-Woolley. That's October 6th and 7th. I think they go all day long, both of those days. I think Sunday they end that usually at 4 o'clock, though. I know that Perkins and Hemlock Highlands is in it. I think there's one up Jones Road if that's still open, but really fun event for the kids. They probably have bagpipes there again. And, mule rides if Chunky will still let people ride. So that's all I want to say.
There's a flyer in today's paper that actually talks all about it, so if you get the paper. Yeah, thank you. Councilman Kinzer.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things. Mark, I'm sorry to bother about this again, but I got an email from another resident on the corner of Northern Street near Haynes Street, and they witnessed a dad and child almost get hit by a speeding car there today, so I want to readdress the possibility of a crosswalk or something to slow traffic down on Northern Street near Haynes, because that is a well-traveled southbound pathway there.
Yeah, I did look into that.
Okay.
And Chief and I have talked about that too. We've developed some kind of a review process for these kind of requests. We literally could put crosswalks at, dozens of more streets than we have in town. And in the traffic world, we have things called warrants to justify those, and that's accident rate, volume of traffic. Neither one of those would justify a crosswalk there. The other thing is enforceability. The Chief can address that. That's just one of those difficult places to come up with a rationale for doing it. We haven't actually had any incidents. We've had the reports that you've given on that, but literally we get that all over town. We literally do. Chief.
We have a patrol car that parks there, a block down from there? All the time on the road, and it's still, we still have that effect, or still have, the perception that there's a big problem there. There's, like Mark was saying, you could pick any area that has any kids in it. We got 4 of them that stand next to the road right out here, 2 blocks from the building, and every morning when we leave, there's like 3 or 4 little girls that stand out by the road, and that to me seems a little bit more hazardous than a lot of different places. So it's crosswalks could help. Kids aren't going to use them, but it's a difficult proposition, because it is. I probably got 40, now add this to it, 42, 43 different places in town that people have complained about traffic. Some are legit, some aren't as legit as others. And, some level of enforcement. You could catch the one guy doing something like that affects anybody that sees that. That's kind of, anytime we do any traffic, we consider anybody that sees those flashy lights is affected. So we try to do an emphasis around the school first thing in the morning and try to stop somebody for anything. Every kid driving to school sees the flashy lights. So every kid that was driving there, every parent driving by, every person going to work, they're affected by that. Doing one traffic stop on Highway 20 affects 100 cars in the time it takes us to do it. Stopping one car down there, we might affect that one that is a perceived problem. But you've got that long stretch that's not quite straight, a little bit of a curve, and we got one stop sign at Puget. So you've got, say, 5 blocks of kind of one straight road to go zooming down. It's like every other street in town, like Mark was saying. We could probably justify a crosswalk somewhere on Reed Street over that anyway. I mean, Reed Street can be a racetrack up there. So it's something we got to look at and measure. I don't know if there's a good answer to it, though.
Okay, thank you. One other thing I'd like to bring up on the corner of Talcott and Wally, those big poplar trees, they're grown out, and there's ivy growing out there again, and it's making it really difficult when you nose out of Talcott onto Wally to see to turn either way, because it's such a narrow street. Is that a property owner issue to get those trees trimmed back again, or who would address that?
When we looked at this a couple of years ago, we actually gave an order to one of the owners there to remove a big one near that. I don't know if it was exactly that corner.
Yeah, it was on that property, but
yeah, the same property.
It's on the Talcott side where they're getting bad now.
So the right-of-ways are fairly narrow, so it likely is private property and likely would have to be handled in a similar manner to that. Aaron got involved in that process, and we worked with the owner, and they did take it out. But it literally costs up to $10,000 to remove those big poplars like that. So we try to be somewhat judicious and take another look at it.
Yeah, I don't know that they need to be removed if the ivy and the brush growing there would just be very helpful.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, some great activities happening the 1st of autumn on these great days down in Riverfront Park. Great to see some service clubs doing baseball tournaments and softball tournaments, and then the photographs for the Pee Wee soccer happening down there. Just again wanted to reiterate to Mark and crew the great job on Bennett and 11th and Nelson getting that road fixed. A lot of great compliments from neighbors about that project, so thanks again, even though there was a little disruption in getting the materials there, but overall it looks really, really good. And let's see, we also wanted to, if I could take a moment about Brewfest.
Sure.
So great to see the city council members supporting the Helping Hands Food Bank fundraiser here in town on Saturday. Lots of folks. Chief, if you have something different, we didn't hear of any incidents at Brewfest.
Somebody needs to not schedule it on Oyster Run weekend.
I know.
Yeah.
Somebody.
But the Banditos and the Brewfest people mixed just fine. But it seems like a judicious separation would be helpful.
Noted. But it was very successful. Lots of folks enjoyed. Great seeing the mayor and again the council members there. My understanding that we raised, we netted $32,000 that day for the food bank, which is just a testament to the nature and of our community that wants to support others. And thank you very much.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. Councilman Dunlea?
I don't have anything today.
Okay. Thank you.
I was out with the mayor out at the Solutions to Addiction just prior to coming here tonight. I have to say it was extremely well done. It really brought home a lot. It brought home a lot to me. How many people are engaged in the recovery process, in the treatment process, and what some of the root causes were. So I felt like our county did a really good job on this tonight. I also wanted to bring up that at the chamber luncheon on the 3rd, we will have candidates for freeholder seats there. And if you are interested, please sign up to attend. This will not be them giving any speeches. What we will do is more of an open table format where we will position the freeholders at different tables and have them move around about every 5 minutes after our sponsor, United Way, is finished with their presentation. So you're all welcome to attend. And then you can always go out and see Chuck's camel.
All right, thank you. And I have to say, I just want to add to the Solutions to Addiction, there were probably 500 people there tonight, which shows that there's a great interest in what's happening within our community and a desire to find some answers. And so it was as Paula said, very powerful. Something that I want to bring to the council's attention, because we do every year send money to Community Action, and I receive emails every now and then from Bill Hinkle, who's actually the director of Community Action, when they have people who live in Sedro-Woolley and have had success rates. So I'm just going to share just a little bit of this. This individual said, Community Action, thank you very much. I stayed in your family transitional shelter last fall, and I want to let you know that by now I have been able to acquire a job and have my own apartment. I'm able to take care of my family, and I'm very thankful to everyone within the community who helped me be successful at this. So just so you know, our dollar's at work. And then I just want to extend to Mark, it sounds like this is your night for kudos. On page 103, I don't know if you saw it in your packet, but it talks about the certification acceptance, and it talks about how Mark and his crew have received this. The city is commended for a high level of responsibility and commitment that demonstrated during the administration of this project, and it has to do with the roundabout, Jameson Street roundabout. It says, we appreciate the cooperation, the positive attitude of the engineering staff in review. So, nice job. Well done. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yep. So, oh, do you want me to mention that? Okay. So the other thing for Community Action, on October 11th, which is a Thursday, out at the Sunamish Casino, there's going to be a Spirit of Hope event. That's through Community Action, and there will be 7 individuals who have come out of poverty. They will be telling their story. We've seen a little bit of it, and it's really quite impactful. It's really powerful. So a chance to see what's actually happening within our community if you want to do that. So that's October the 11th. And Community Action has that information on their website. Anything else you want to add? Okay. So moving on, we have, am I following this correctly? A proclamation. We've had a lot of proclamations. I think this is the 3rd one I've read this month. This one has to do with Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And so the statement goes as, whereas each year in the United States more than 15,000 children from birth to 19 years old were diagnosed with cancer, equal to about 42 childhood cancer diagnoses each day. And whereas each year worldwide there are more than 300,000 new childhood cancer diseases, equal to about 1 every 3 minutes for a family who hears the word, your child has cancer. And whereas although the 5-year survival rate for the childhood cancers has reached 80%, nearly 2,000 American children under the age of 19 still die each year from cancer, making it the leading killer of children by disease. And whereas those who do survive will face at least one chronic health condition later in life, not limited to but including heart, liver, lung damage, infertility, secondary cancers, growth deficiencies. And whereas the causes of childhood cancer are largely unknown and more studies are needed to understand which treatments are best for children, and whereas cancer treatment for children most often differs from traditional adult treatments and takes into account the children's developmental needs and other factors, and whereas children including Layla Beckstrom, whose mother sent this, are among the hundreds of children being treated for cancer in the state of Washington, and whereas Washington is a caring state with a community that supports children and families. Now, therefore, I, Mayor Julia Johnson, for the City of Sedro-Woolley, do hereby proclaim September 18 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. So I think we all probably know families who are impacted by this. So it is public comment. I'm going to begin it at 7:59. So if you have a public comment, please come forward, state your name, your address, and try to keep it to 3 minutes. Is that are you flagging me? Did you want to come forward? Okay.
Well, believe it or not, I really didn't have a lot to say tonight, and I don't think I would have come up here, but a couple things came up that some of the folks mentioned. It's not things being actioned on, so I guess it's okay to speak about it.
We know who you are, but could you state your name and address?
I'm Judith Dunley.
No, you're not.
Cross-dresser. Dennis O'Neill, 109 Telcott Street, Sedro-Woolley.
Thank you.
I had a question on that deal about these, about the schools and everywhere, everybody's speeding through. Nobody likes those photo cameras, but I'll tell you, that's one place to be great, and I don't think even the public would complain too loudly. It'd save a lot of resources, patrolmen and everything. You don't screw around with kids, and that's one place you could probably get acceptance from the public, where a lot of them just hate those cameras. You take a photo, I think that'd be a great place to get people used to slowing down, because those things are, man, they got you. You're done. So just the thought there, because it would save a lot of patrolmen, a couple cars maybe, whatever. The other thing is on that property, I haven't seen it, I don't know what the zoning is out there, but I know 4 houses out there isn't going to do much more than not even a ripple in what's going on. Is there any possibility, I don't know what the zoning is, I don't know if you could put multifamily out there, and I don't understand how anybody, including Becky, who I know works at Century 21 or someplace like that, Brown McMillan, you got to have an idea what you're going to put on the property, come up with a value. You can't appraise like what was suggested. There's no way in the world. But if you came out and said, we're going to put an apartment house out there that's going to serve 20 families and an interim, as you get more money and you grow, and, that would serve a lot more purpose than 4 houses. You got 4 houses, that's wonderful. You got 4 people you helped. You put in an apartment house. You got transition, people coming in, getting better, going out and buying houses. You could put maybe, 15, 20 people out there, and the zoning's not right. Take a look at, doing something, a little tweaking with the zoning. You're the city council. You make the decisions. And take a look at it. See if it can be done. Talk to Mount Vernon, what they've done. Burlington, too. Get some ideas. It's going to really depend, the appraised value is going to depend on what you're going to put on the property. It's not, and a realtor cannot, Becky's pretty sharp, but an appraisal, you pay for what you get. You're not going to get an appraisal for $700 unless you might as well just have a realtor do it in that case. $700, it's I don't know what they're charging for single family residences, but I think it's got to be $650 or $700 now. So you're not going to get one on a commercial piece of property that's going to mean anything to anybody. So those are the 2 main things that I had to chat about just listening back there. And the only other thing I have is, I'm not beating this thing to death, but the iron skillet, when you paid for that, was that based on appraisal by an appraiser, or you just go for 10% off on the value? I mean, it would have been wonderful. That property's on the market for 2 years. It's the city hadn't bought it, probably would have been 2 or 3, maybe longer, more years. The value is based on appraisals, and a good appraisal would have brought that value. It could have been less. It most likely would have been, because nothing's moving in Sedro-Woolley. And that's something you got to keep a look at. It's the same everywhere. Even the homeless issue. I check Montana because I'm from there originally, and I go back there and look, and this homeless issue is across the board. It's not just here. And you got to use, we got resources, the best use of resources instead of, a subjective value, and you try to help everybody. But take a look at some of the things out of the box rather than getting in a television. That's all. Thanks for time. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. That was...
Oh, I was going to leave it for you. Thanks, man.
Oh, I don't know if I get back up. Well, if you go down, you're in good hands with firefighter, paramedic, guard Lily there will take care of you.
Oh, dear. I'm Megan Gardulli. I am Vice President of the Sedro-Woolley Volunteer Firefighters Association. I live on 8787 FNS Grade Road. I just wanted to, if you haven't heard, our 28th annual Give Burns the Boot dinner and auction is coming up on October 6th. So I not only wanted to let you guys know, but also extend the invitation. We've got live auction, silent auction, a dessert dash. We've got tons of raffles, and this is our biggest fundraiser of the year. Last year we raised about $28,000, and this year we're hoping to go for more to bring our grand total to well over $300,000 in the last 28 years. So you can find tickets to the event for $10 from any of your favorite local firefighters here at Sedro-Woolley, and we'll hope to see you on the 6th at 6 p.m. It's at the community center.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Anyone else? I will close this public comment at 8:05. So now we're going to open the public hearing. Let's start the public hearing at 8:06. And Doug, you're up. This will be talking about the 2019 budget.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Tonight is the first public hearing that we'll be holding this fall on our 2019 annual budget. And so for the first meeting, we'll talk about our revenues and fund balances. And as we follow the state requirements for those things, that's the first check in the box we need to do in this cycle. So I know this screen is a little hard to see for everybody, the angle that it's at, so I did provide handouts to each of you at the dais there. If you want to take notes or have any questions for me, please feel free to jot those down and we'll be glad to help you. So I'll go ahead and start out. Now it's going to be a little awkward. I'm going to be pointing over here to advance the slide, but then talking about over here. So it'll look a little awkward, but it'll get us through it okay. So the first thing to do is to talk a little bit about our targets that we're going to be hitting as we go through this budget cycle. Tonight, as I mentioned, we're doing our first public hearing. We'll be talking about revenue projections to begin the budget process. And where that will get us is into the month of October. Aaron and I will be spending our days together with the departments going through their expenditure requests. And that's where we start fine-tuning those requests and making sure we have funding for everything, looking at what transfers we need to do between funds to fund different capital outlay projects, things like that. We'll be holding that second public hearing. We probably don't all have our calendars with us, but that'll be later in the month of October. And then we have a target date of November 28th to actually adopt the budget, and that'll be our third and final hearing. That'll get us plenty of time to wrap up any final issues before we get it in before the end of the year. So some of the projections we'll talk about, I'll mainly go through the general fund projections. They're the primary ones that are tax-based and the ones that are a little more challenging sometimes, and we'll talk about some of those issues and what we're looking at right now. We'll still adjust some of these projections, even though we talk about these tonight. If we get grant income or things that we're going to target and go after, it may change some of these projections. Also, we're basing them on what we're seeing as of August this year. We still have 4 more months to go. So there can be some changes in things that may vary these slightly, but I think we'll be pretty much on target. We've got some good data to run off of, and I think that'll get us some good solid numbers. So we will adjust these as we learn a little bit more about what our business activities will be for next year.
So I'll go ahead. Now I'm going to put our inner geek accountants on the line here. We have a lot of graphs to go through and stuff, but I think graphs are always better than 1,000 numbers on a sheet. So I'll walk us through these and explain what we see a little bit, and I think that'll give us a good feel for what we're looking at as a city as far as our future revenue streams. And always the first one we kick off with is property taxes. And what I've done on these graphs is taken the last about 6 years, or excuse me, the last 5 years, and adding in 2019 as the 6th year. A couple of things you'll see on the graphs. Now, this slide isn't the best example of it, but you'll see about the first 4 bars be higher up, and that 5th bar will always look low for some odd reason. Well, what that is, if you look on this here, you'll notice we'll be looking at actual numbers for 2014 through 2017. 2018 is a budget number. And so you want that bar to be a little bit lower because we're being conservative. And so that's a good thing. It's not that 2018 is going to come in lower, but that just shows that when we're doing projections, we always try to target to being about 95% of actual. You want to have a little bit of cushion there because we don't want to be in a position of over-budgeting revenues. So this one, property taxes, is the first one. It shows a little bit of a downward tilt on that bar. That's a trend line, and that kind of shows a weighted average of what the growth rate is on that type of revenue. When I looked at that, I thought, okay, property taxes typically don't go down, but what we had was a special levy in the first 3 years, and that was for the 1996 general obligation bond. I believe it was on this building, or the public safety component of this area here. That actually paid off in 2016. So the bond paid off, and that revenue source that was a voted bond issue that was specifically for that went away as well. So to really look at our property taxes and what they're doing, see what I mean? I peeled off that piece and just show it net of that special levy. So as you can see, there's a slight increase now. That's what our true picture on property tax revenues are. We haven't passed a property tax cost of living adjustment or a levy increase in many years. So what that's really attributable to is new construction. If there's an annexation, a new house is built, that adds on to the assessed valuation of the city, and you'll get a little bit of increase each year from that addition like that. And that's what we see here. Historically, when we do the math on that, it means our revenue grows at about 1.53% a year. And that'll be critical. We'll talk about that in a little bit, what that means. The next one I look at is sales taxes. And this is a curve that I like. You see an upward sloping curve like that. It's good for supporting city programs and services. Again, there's a little piece in here. You'll notice the first couple of years are green on top, but then there's a purple piece in here. And that purple piece represents the public safety sales tax, the 0.1% that was passed. That money is dedicated to a special fund that's saved for equipment for public safety. So we can't use that for general operations of our city government. So what I've done is the same type of thing. I've netted out that public safety one, and you can see our growth rate there. Our sales tax rate is growing at about 5.25%. And a little bit of change. You can see that 2018 year's a little lower. That's just for that conservative budgeting piece that we talked about. So that is good news from what I've seen in different communities, especially coming out of the recession. I know Sedro-Woolley probably experienced it like everyone else. There was a double dip in sales tax revenues right around 2009, 2010. And as I've looked back, Sedro-Woolley is getting close to just kind of breaking even now from where things were at the time that decline started. So that's a good sign. One of the things that we'll need to do a little bit more of is when we look at sales taxes and you see an increase, you want to be really careful, because you may have had some new construction or different things going on in the community that are one-time events that bring in sales tax. It's easy to see an uplift and think that's great news, but you can be surprised the next year when it comes back down a little bit if there's not another project in the pipeline to replace it. So you can have one-time sales tax revenue streams coming in like that. The next item is utility taxes. Now, the city has two, more or less, types of utility taxes. We have outside companies that pay us utility tax. That's on electricity and telephone, those types of things. And then we have city-owned utilities, and that's on sewer, solid waste, and storm drain. So we have two different kinds there. They're both growing probably over that 6-year period at about 5%. But one of the things I noticed when I plotted this is it's a little bit flatter the last couple of years. So I would like to know why that is. That's one of the things for us to look at the next couple of years, because over that period of time, it's been about 1.35%. So even though it's been steep over the long run, the utility taxes have leveled out. Now, one piece that we don't have on here quite yet, because we need to have some more discussions, is the utility tax on city utilities changes when utility rates change. So if we have projected changes, say, in recycling or solid waste or sewer, that will also adjust the utility tax rates. So I know we have recycling issues we've talked about in those. When those kick in, that will raise this growth rate up a little bit. You'll see a little bit of a change on there. So those are related, and you'll see that happen at some point in the future. All taxes. So if I take these now and combine them all together, what I'm really interested in is looking at the growth rate. And it runs about 3.3%. It's hard to see up in here, but we have this fancy arithmetic formula here, and that little piece right there tells you in decimal form what the percentage increase or rate is. And you can see it's 3.3%. And just quickly, we'll go through a couple other ones. License and permits. We heard the difference about land use permits and building permits. Building permits, and you can see there is not a steady line. Those bars are above it or below it. And that's because building activity doesn't happen in a nice, calm manner. Some year you'll have a lot, some years you'll have not as much. And so you can see here, we've had years that have been up or below that trend line there. Overall, though, it's growing at about a little over 5%. But that, it's like the Merrill Lynch commercials. They say, what is it, past history of what you've earned doesn't guarantee what you're going to get in the future. It's the kind of same thing with building permits. We'll still have to see, and it's going to depend on what comes in and what that development activity is. Intergovernmental, this is a pretty good one for the city because it represents mainly grants. As you can see, I have two lines on this item here. We have a blue line, which is the core intergovernmental revenues. And what that is we get liquor, excise, and profit tax money from the state. And the last couple of years, we're now getting marijuana revenues. So those are steady revenues that come in each year. But combined with those in this classification are grant monies. So grant monies are going to depend what we're doing. So you might have one year, if you look at the very beginning here, I bet if you look at 2014, our grant revenues were lower that year. But we might have been focusing in a different area. And when you look at 2018, there's a lot of grants in there. There was also money that the state was giving to cities, like streamlined sales tax, to make up for some different differences when they changed the laws a few years ago. That is going away. So what we used to get, which might be in some of this upper area here, is now evaporating. So we're going to be making our projection a little bit low this year until we go through the rest of the budget and see who's going to apply for grants. So if there's something the departments are thinking about and we can go after a grant, we can see this bar raised back up depending what happens this next month. Does that make sense? So charges for goods and services, this one shows a 14% increase over that trend period like that. Mainly what that is, this is transport revenue for ambulance services. That's been a new revenue that's come in here. A couple other different things. We have an agreement with Fire District 8 for support of their area and some other items there. This trend right now does not reflect the EMS revenues that are projected from the new initiative that we're working with Skagit County right now. And it would be nice, we'll get the agreement signed off first, and then I'll start plugging those things in there and get that going as well. But looking at our operations that we have today, this is what we've been experiencing over the last 6 years. Fines and penalties, this is where we look to Chief Lynn, because fines and penalties have to do with the guys with those flashy lights he was talking about. Fines and penalties have actually kind of sloped down a little bit. I know in other cities I've looked at, there were some changes in some laws as far as what we could actually assess penalties for in that. So I'm not surprised to see that come down somewhat. We'd like to think it just means people are driving better, and all those flashy lights have been helping in doing that. But it has shown a bit of a downward turn on that. Interest, and this is the last one on here, interest earnings and other. This one is growing 21%. The sad part is it's just a small amount of money. But as you know, back in 2014, if you had any CDs at the bank or any money, we had some of the lowest interest rates in history. What we're starting to do now, like we heard the Fed raise rates, that's the third one this year. So our interest earnings were able to bump that up because we're seeing rates now that are 3 times what they were just a couple years ago. So that's good news, at least from an investment perspective. So overall, combined revenues, we have a little bit of flattening going on this last couple of years. Right now, it's looking about 2% is our core growth rate in revenues. But again, we still want to see what grant revenues we're going to go after. There are still some things that we want to put in here. And that number will probably come up a little bit as we finish up this budget process. As we get more towards the preliminary budget, we'll talk about that again as far as how growth rates are affecting expenses and our revenues as well. And this is a lot of information I can maybe take if there's any questions on the revenue piece before we move on to fund balance.
Do we have anything that shows where we are to date?
For the current year?
Yeah.
Yes, we do. I don't have it right to hand out tonight, but tomorrow morning I will send you our most recent year-to-date report. It's the same one I showed maybe a month or 2 ago. I just finished that one for the current. I'll send that to you. And that shows how we're tracking.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the next piece that we need to talk about is what we call fund balance, or it can also be called ending cash reserves or cash and investments. There's a lot of different terms, but what it really represents is how much money we have in the city checkbook at any one time. I'm probably dating myself when I say checkbook, because how many people use checkbooks anymore? But I'm one of them, guilty. So what it is, there needs to be a certain amount of cash that we have on hand at any one time. And we talked about earlier this year about, especially in the general fund with property taxes coming in May and then later in November, you don't have this nice steady revenue stream to match that nice steady expenditure load that you have. So you have to be careful between those 2 payment dates as far as having enough cash to cover your costs until that next wave of property tax receipts come in. So that's why talking about fund balance is really important. Right now, looking at 2018, we had a targeted amount we thought we would hit, and that'll then be what the beginning fund balance is for next year. So that's why I'm looking at that right now. As I look at where we're going, I'm still working with some of the department heads on their budgets and their expenditure reports right now to see where they think they will end up by the end of the year. There are pluses and minuses, but it's looking like we're going to end up right about where we thought. There are some areas we've got a little bit more revenue in. There are some areas where expenditures were a little bit higher. We did a purchase of some property just to the east of City Hall and the fire station here. So those things like that. So there are times when you will save up money and then spend it. It kind of throws that out, but that's not a bad thing. That balance out. So the main thing we have to talk about for a minute is the budget equation. And this kind of helps see what it is when we talk about fund balance and why that's important.
So we all know, we hear about a balanced budget, and it's common sense. Revenues need to equal expenses, or at least expenses don't want to be higher than revenues. So revenues, there's the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. We call them GASB. We call them GASB when we love them. We call them GASB when we hate them. It's usually the latter. But with revenues, there are two pieces to it. So when we talk about the checkbook example, when you start a budget and you look at your revenues, you look at how much money you're going to have in the checkbook on day one. And in governmental terms, that's considered a revenue, because it's money now you have available. You add to that the revenues you're going to earn during the year. So you got two pieces to revenue, and that's your revenue available for that budget year. The next piece then is expenses. And it's easy. It's the expenditures of money we're going to spend, and then the money we're going to have left over. So you have money that's available for the year. You're either going to spend it or you're going to have it sitting in the bank somewhere. So the way they actually calculate a balanced budget is your total revenues that are available should balance with either you're going to spend it or you're going to keep it. It's pretty easy to get. But it can be complicated sometimes, and I have an example to show you why. And this is something that we always need to be aware of. This is an example I set up. It's a fictitious city that has $1 million at the beginning of their year. They plan to get about $1.3 million during the year, so they think they'll have about $2.3 million total to spend during the budget year. They do their budget, they have $1.5 million. They think they're going to have $800,000 then left over. When you add them together, look at that, your budget balances. So they think it's great, but it's not. And the thing you have to look out for is this. You have to look at that beginning fund balance and see what's happening, because even though you have a balanced budget, this city just spent down their reserves $200,000. I worked with the city more years ago than I want to admit that was having a cash flow problem. And when I came in, they had about an $8 million budget, which means they spend $650,000 or so a year. A month. And they had $15,000 in the bank. And I was trying to figure out, okay, what do we do from here? And then when I looked back, the first thing I went to was their fund balance. They had spent it down. And their mayor and city council were puzzled. They said, we've had a balanced budget. How could we be spending it down? They weren't watching their fund balances and seeing how that was coming down. So we had to put together a plan on how to get back from that and get them back up into a good position. So that's one thing we'll always look at, are those fund balances, and that's why it's important for us to talk about them when we're talking about revenues. So as I mentioned, it's the amount we have in the bank on January 1. Best practices, we'll have a conversation sometime in the future about budget best practices, but the number that's out there is 16.67%. An easier way to remember it, it's 2 months. So some cities will say we have a policy, we'll have 2 months of expenses saved. Some cities will say it the other way, we'll have 2 months of revenues set aside. But really you want to be looking at, if you have a balanced budget, it should basically be the same number. But that's what we want to really be targeting to get to as a fund balance. Well, and this is the group. It's the National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting. This book they have is a great cure for insomnia, but it has great information for budgeting. They talk about setting goals, similar to what we did in the council retreat, how you do approaches to achieve those goals. You're just going down the ladder here, what you do to develop to get to your approaches. And then how do you assess performance and then make adjustments? We were talking about that monthly report just a minute ago. You want to really be evaluating your performance. There's a couple things you'll see on this month's report. We made some adjustments because we saw those red lines going in a direction we didn't like. So this book also makes recommendations on fund balance, and that's where the 2 months comes from. So how much fund balance is just right? Now, it's kind of the Goldilocks principle a little bit, because some like it too much, some like it too little, but somewhere there's the amount that's just right. And every city's going to be different.
I've worked with one city who had very calm. Their revenues were always the same. Expenditures were always the same. They didn't have a lot of volatility where they were having to watch their reserves as close. I had another peer who worked at the city of Everett, and he was that person. And it's because they had Boeing. And when Boeing was doing great, they had tons of sales tax money coming in. But when Boeing wasn't, or the backlog kind of slowed things down, their fund balance suffered. So they really had to setting a 40%, 35% fund balance so they could weather those fluctuations in Boeing's activity. So you have it where a lot of cities can be different just depending what's in their environment and what's happening. So, and this just real quick is talking about the 16%. The first 5%, you need that just to pay your bills. You don't want to be in the position of having to borrow short-term money to meet payroll and other operating costs. No one wants to be in that role. If you get up to 10%, that gives you a little bit more cushion for emergencies or things that come up that were surprises. That 16.67, that's the best practices rule. And that's the one that the National Advisory Council suggests. Once you get above that, then you've got some money to do some investing. And when you're talking about investing, that's economic development, economic investment. It could mean capital, or it could mean investing in a new service or a new program for your community. But you have to set that pyramid base first to get there, so you can have those opportunities. So that's enough of the accounting geekness. We'll get us back to some of the other things. The enterprise funds, these are utilities. We'll be working on those and developing that list of projects. That's kind of the next big hurdle for us to get through. We've talked about recycling a little bit already this year. And we'll be coming back in late October when we talk about property taxes. At the same time, we'll be talking about utility rates. We have a new special revenue fund coming. That'll be for the ambulance service. High probability it'll be a new fund like that. There's also a chance we could incorporate that into the general fund. It's just an accounting method to see which one is more efficient for us to be using. Looking ahead, we talked about sales tax trends. I want to be getting more into that. Aaron and I were talking about a software program I'm looking at with a company called Microflex. And they will take your sales tax database and they can tell us exactly what sector. Is it home and gardening? Is it restaurants? Is it retail? They can tell you where that money's coming from. What's really important is look at the construction, because that is one will tell you what are your one-time projects in there. So I can't remember, it's about $100 a month or so, I think, for the licensing fee, but we can get all that information, and it gives us a lot of tools to be able to start looking at our sales tax base and kind of monitoring what it is that affects our revenue streams here. And then again, grant revenues is something we want to go after. I did notice fuel prices, they're not too bad right now, but when we did the budget for 2018, they were lower. So we're having a little bit of a struggle with fuel prices on our budget right now. Nothing bad, but it's just something we need to always monitor, because that's very volatile, as we all know. So this is always my favorite slide, the tortoise and the hare. This is what all cities face, not just Sedro-Woolley. But we have revenues are the hare, the rabbit are the expenses. So our challenge is when those lines cross, what steps do we take to keep our budget balanced, at the same time making sure our service delivery is as good as it can be. We'll talk about that. You'll see that slide some more in the future. So those are the items that I have, and I can entertain any questions you might have.
Council, any questions? All right, I think so. Thank you, Doug.
I personally appreciate the presentation. It's highly understandable. So, good job.
Thank you, Doug. And we did have a sign-up sheet for the anyone who wanted to make any comments during the public hearing regarding the budget, but nobody signed up, so I am going to close it at 8:33. And we will move on to unfinished business. And so, Mr. Berg, I think you're up.
Well, I feel like we've talked about this an awful lot.
Yeah.
But I'll just take a couple minutes to walk through this and then answer any questions you might have. Since we last met here at the City Council, Jeff Sargent's in the audience tonight. He's the Skagit County EMS Director. Between the chief, assistant chief, me, finance, Public Works has been involved. Planning came to the party today, although mostly with permit requirements. But that happens. And mayor, so lots of meetings between the last meeting and this meeting. I'm excited to tell you that the agreement that you have on your dais is the final. So this is actually ready for approval without condition. We were able to resolve the last issues involving insurance this afternoon, and we think we've caught most of the typos. So that's pretty exciting. Arrow Skagit approved this agreement yesterday. Mount Vernon, I think, discussed it tonight, and they're now looking for an approval a week from tonight. Burlington's got it on the agenda for possible action tomorrow night. City of Anacortes they looked at it Monday night, but they're looking for possible action the following Monday, October 1st. And Skagit County then would be approving the agreement on October 8th. I believe they've scheduled a hearing for 1:30 on Monday the 8th. So assuming that process kind of continues, we'll have the 6 parties all on board and a final agreement executed by October 8th. So the big picture hasn't changed. We're looking at the county providing EMS levy money, committed dollar amounts by year for 6 years, as well as some front-loaded cash and equipment, along with some levy equalization dollars for capital that we would get in 2022 to go along with the ambulance. In exchange, the Sedro-Woolley Fire Department will staff up firefighter paramedics, or actually we could do it any way we want, because this contract is a choose-your-own-adventure. The county wants us to meet certain response standards, and how we do that is our business. So there's a little bit of a difference from kind of the current model, where at least the sense in the community was that the county had pretty strong feelings about how the business was done. Now it's do it how you want to do it. You just meet those response time standards. So the agreement's got all that detailed in it. I could certainly walk through much of it. That's kind of the short status update, as well as the agreement. Looking for action tonight after we discuss and have any questions. And then there's also a preview agreement for you in the packet of a draft joint billing agreement between the city of Sedro-Woolley and Burlington to allow Burlington to utilize our newly hired, what we call her, our Medicare compliance specialist and billing clerk. So that's not ready for action tonight. That's a preview. We'll get that to you in the not too distant future. I guess the last item for me is I would just call your attention. We provided some budget information in the packet, and the late materials side, it's on pages, unnumbered pages, must be about 34 pages into the packet, is the Skagit County 6-year EMS budget. And then behind that would be the city's worksheet on our cost estimates. We'll, of course, hone that, detail it, and kind of build it into the overall city budget as part of the process. But I know that was a question that a couple council members had, well, probably all of you had the last meeting, so we wanted to get that in front of you tonight so you could see what it costs, what the revenues are, and how we will be paying for it. So, after all these meetings, what can we tell you? We're ready
I'd like
to go.
to make a motion that we accept the EMS agreement with the county and the other interlocal participants.
Second.
Okay, we had a motion by Kelly and seconded by Couch to approve the agreement between Skagit County, Skagit, Anacortes, Burlington, Mount Vernon, and Sedro-Woolley. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Yep, motion carries.
All right, now we just have quarters to build and drugs to buy and, a long list. So we anticipate this will be a recurring item for you pretty much from now to the end of the year. as we ramp up for a 1/1/19 launch. So thank you very much.
So, business license, new business, first reading. Is that you, Aaron?
Yeah, so this is about your third touch. We called it a first reading. I don't know if you need to have 2 readings or not. That's up to you. Following up on our last conversation, what you've got in the packet is an ordinance that complies with state law and provides a no-charge business license for those businesses that generate less than $2,000 of revenue. So they still have to get the license, but it's free. That was one of the 2 options. I did add, so in the packet beginning on page 79, you can see some highlighted sections. Everything on page 79 and 80 and most of 81 is the state language. So that is what you're going to adopt whether you like it or not, unless you don't want to charge business license fees. Now, I did add a couple of my own suggestions for you, which you did not ask for, but I ran into them in the process of drafting the ordinance, and that in particular in section 1 on page 81 under paragraph 6, the definition of engaging in business. Our current code says that minors doing the newspaper delivery is not business. I have suggested that you expand that to minors engaged in babysitting, lemonade stands, lawn mowing, and similar activities. Point of fact, I don't think we're going to go bust a lemonade stand, whether you put it in the code or not. But some city in America does do that every summer, and you see that on the national news usually, along with all of the people who are unhappy about it. So I'm just thinking it makes sense to kind of put what makes sense into the code. And then D, farmers selling their own produce. My understanding is they're already exempt, and so I think that just codifies what we already do there as well. And then I added one additional change, which is on page 82. We used to call, under B, we called these licenses specialty business licenses. State likes to refer to them as regulatory business licenses, so these are businesses that take a little effort to regulate. So I changed specialty to regulatory, and I'm proposing on page 84 that you include the marijuana folks with the same regulatory license as the alcohol folks. I think you could probably easily justify a higher fee, but having not talked to you, I simply suggested aligning marijuana and alcohol at the same $250 pledge level. And that's it. So this is either, if you're comfortable, this is ready for action. If you're not comfortable, then what changes would you like? And we'll bring that back to you next time. Or if you just want to do it next time, that's okay too. The state's deadline is, I think it's October 17th in my mind. Is that right? Oh yeah, that's what it says in the packet here. So the 10th gives us a week to turn it around to the business licensing service. But, frankly, we'd be just as happy to turn it around this week too.
Aaron, what does state law allow us to raise the liquor cannabis licensing to? What's the cap on that?
I don't think there is actually a cap, but I think the regulatory license fee should have some relationship to the regulatory function. So when we first had proposed the liquor license fee, the staff had brought that to City Council at a $1,000 level, and we had one employee of a bar show up that night and propose a $250 number, which council thought was a great idea that night.
Outstanding.
And none of you.
What did we do about the $1,000 mobile food vending?
I did not hear any consensus from the council, so I propose no changes to that.
So we had talked about it, though, as being a one-of-a-kind on that.
I brought it up, I think, all 3 times and sort of pointed out that it poses some problems for us in terms of enforcing and all of that. We talked through why it was there, and I just didn't feel like I'd heard from the council that there was direction to change that.
My suggestion would be that we discuss this in work session next week to make sure we're all in.
I'm getting a little nervous about the length of next week's work session. We've got multiple substantive items that have been punted to it. We can add it. I'd suggest bottom of the list, just because we are getting to the point where next week's meeting's looking a lot more like a busy regular meeting than a study session. But again, that's up to you.
I guess I would like just more information on what we can do with the licensing on liquor and cannabis. And I would also like to look at the simplifying our mobile vendor licensing.
So, looks like we are going to...
We can do that. One suggestion may be, given the timing, that we may need to separate what the state's requiring, because if we don't do that by the 17th, you will have no business licenses starting January 1st. So, we're less than 3 weeks away from that deadline, and if we're going to begin a substantive conversation now about mobile vending and liquor and cannabis licensing, I'm concerned that could easily stretch beyond the one meeting between now and then, the one regular meeting.
What the main thing that we
Paula, excuse me.
I'm sorry.
I have a suggestion. Would it be appropriate to divide that motion then between what the regulatory with the state and then the other things that we'd like to talk about? Is that in order?
Yeah, I think you could, and it's going to have to be an ordinance, so we're talking about potentially 2 ordinances, which is fine, but the state stuff, you kind of have no choice on, so you could adopt this without any change, and then just plan to open it up and continue that conversation starting at the next meeting, and that doesn't preclude you from doing that. Or you could not include the $250 cannabis and the lemonade stand piece. Those are really the only elements that are not state mandated. So it's up to you on that.
I guess I would be fine moving forward with the ordinance, but at a time when we have, I guess we're not on the state time crunch to look at our liquor and cannabis licensing funds, but we could leave it as is now, move forward with the ordinance.
Is that a motion?
Let me get to that page.
Page 78.
Make a motion to adopt the attached ordinance amending the business license chapter of the Sedro-Woolley Municipal Code, Chapter 5.04.
Second.
Okay. So we have a motion by Cornegay to adopt ordinance 1904-18, and it was seconded by Councilman Couch. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carries.
So with that understanding, are you comfortable not having this on next week's study session and putting it then on the next regular council meeting for follow-up? Because I do want some more direction. I'd be happy to come up with ideas for you on mobile vending and on the other, but now this is at least the 3rd time we've had that conversation, and I just didn't get a sense that the council was of one mind.
I guess where I left the last meeting was I thought there was a consensus on simplifying the mobile vending. I
felt too.
hadn't looked at or thought of the liquor and cannabis until you highlighted it and brought it to our attention.
Well, so if we've got a couple minutes, when you say simplifying, are we talking about, right now we've got essentially 4 categories, right? People who come to special events, people who are like the ice cream truck that move every 10 minutes a block. Special event people either pay nothing or $35 depending on the event. Ice cream truck person pays $35 a year. We got the $200 level, which is either a mobile vendor who parks at a place like the tap room that provides fixed seating and restrooms. It's $200 per location. Or it's a mobile vendor who vends on private property to those private property owners' customers. So the lunch truck going to Janicki is the example. And then the gold level is the $1,000 a year mobile vendor who can do all of those things without locational restrictions, but can't violate ADA or block public parking. So, that would be the stick a fork in it, who can show up at Log Rodeo and does not have to pay Log Rodeo if they're not, if they don't want to. They can show up at Dole Guffey's property and vend. They have a city license to do that regardless of whatever the special event activity is. So when you say simplify, if you're
not having 4 stages of, let's find pick a fee, and that'll be our mobile vending, what our price is.
what kind of a one-size-fits-all scenario, a single category or two categories?
I think we would have to have two because, correct me if I'm wrong, we're 35 on the ice cream man, and then if we went 250 or something more reasonable than $1,000 because, frankly, we don't have compliance anyway.
Yeah, okay.
And we already discussed the children selling lemonade to where that would be exempt, correct?
You just passed that in tonight's ordinance.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
You got the kiddie lemonade stand. So last weekend, Sickba Home Tour was at a property in Sedro-Woolley, across the street from City Hall. We had a mobile vendor who makes really great French fries, Curly's Cart. He was parked on a city alley at the end of Abbott's Alley and ran his vending operation for 2 or 3 days. No business license. So, that's one of those questions. I don't know that Curly made $250, right, during the weekend. Maybe he did. I don't know. It was pretty crummy weather. If we like that, that's an example of somebody who's not going to come to town if he's got a pony up. Same thing during Little League. We had the Kona Shave Ice outfit out of Bellingham was vending out of Chanakee Fields. So, there's...
Let's try to have a discussion about this at the end of work session. If we have time. If not, we'll table it again.
Yeah, okay.
So I'd like to move on with it also because it's 10 to 9, and so we have about 10 minutes left here. So moving on to the skate park, and this is a pretty simple one as I understand. We didn't have hours for Sunday, is that correct? We're adding Sunday?
Yep, that's it.
That's it. So this would be...
a 6-day week to a 7-day week.
Is that of any issue to the police department?
No, it's been requested by the police department for enforcement purposes.
I make a motion that we accept that ordinance change.
Second.
Okay. So let's get...
Page 87.
Would be 1904.
Yeah. So there's a motion to adopt ordinance 1905-18, an ordinance amending the hours of operation for the skate park. We have a motion by Councilwoman Kelly. Did I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Councilwoman Kinzer. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. So, John, I think this is you, the proposed amendment for residential 15 parking requirements.
Well, I was going to say that this was the easiest to review, but that last skate park one was really easy. This is a really simple change. The long and short of it is the R15 zone, which is the residential 15, that's our multifamily zone, does not have any regulations addressing parking pad size for houses, single-family houses with garages. All of our other residential zones do have such a requirement, and if you think about a standard subdivision in the R5 or R7 zone, they're all required to have a 25-foot parking pad in front of all garages because people drive cars that are 16, 17 feet, leave a couple feet shy from the garage so they can walk past their car, and then they hang out into the sidewalk or street. You can go around Arizo Loop and you'll see 2/3 of the driveways cars are hanging out into the sidewalk. So we have a requirement for 25 feet in all the residential zones. The R15 zone does not have this requirement, and I believe that's just an oversight. The R15 zone was envisioned as a multifamily zone where it wouldn't be single-family home development. It would be apartments that don't have their own individual garages. They would have parking lots. So this is something that we, at the planning level and the planning commission, addressed a long time ago, and I didn't have a chance to bring it to the council, so I apologize to the planning commission for reviewing this a long time ago and just getting it to the council now. So it's a simple change, just as the wording. It's a 2-sentence change that in all cases there shall be a minimum off-street parking apron of 25 feet in length directly in front of all garage door entrances when accessing a street either to the front or side of a residence. where garage doors access an alley, the off-street parking apron shall be at least 10 feet. And that is the extent of it, and it is consistent with the rest of the parking pad requirements in other residential zones.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, well, we have a motion to amend the residential 15-zone parking requirements. Do I have a second?
Second.
So, sorry about that. I should say that it was actually, the motion was made by Couch, seconded by Cornegay. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
Well, actually, it was just an issue. He didn't write it yet because it was first read. Yeah. Okay. So that is about it. If there's any comments or concerns regarding the information items, page 98 through 104. Otherwise, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Madam Mayor? Yes, I'd like a point of personal privilege to wish a happy birthday to Councilmember Owen.
Oh, yes. Happy birthday, Chuck.
Happy birthday, Chuck.
Hey, happy birthday.
With that, I move to adjourn.
We are adjourned.
Today?
Yeah.